Hello, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Theology and Rod. This is going to be a different sort of episode. We are going to be talking about rock and roll. And I'm not really taking any kind of like theological or spiritual spin on the conversation. I just invited on the show a couple of people who I know pretty well, Brian Zahnd and Jay Newman, who know a whole lot about rock and roll, and we all love music. And so this is just a random, bantering, free-flowing conversation about rock and roll, the history of it, how we should think through it, why we need to appreciate rock and roll music. And I love this conversation. If you don't like rock and roll, you might not like it. So you can skip this one and tune in to another more mainstream Theology and Raw episode. But if you like rock and roll, I think you will appreciate this conversation. Jay Newman is my good friend who is a pitmaster and barbecue artist. He's been on the show several times as our resident Christian anarchist. And Brian Zahnd is a well-known pastor, speaker, writer, and he's been on the podcast several times too. So without further ado, please welcome back to the show the one and only Brian Zahnd and Jay Newman. All right, welcome to the first of its kind, a Theology and Raw podcast where we're simply talking about music, in particular rock and roll. I've got my friends Brian Zahnd and Jay Newman on the show. Hey guys, you guys have both been guests on Theology and Raw, so welcome back. I don't know how many times it's been, but
good to see you, Preston.
Yeah. All right, why don't I just let me start. Let me start with a what would you call it, Jay? A clickbait question. Let's just start with who are the best rock and roll bands and why. And I almost don't like asking that question because it's like, well, what do you mean? How do you measure that? There is no the best. You can respond how you want.
There
if
are
you want to kind of unpack
there are serious contenders.
Okay, why don't you start there? Who are the serious?
Well, I mean, everybody's going to bring up, first of all, they're going to say the Beatles and the Stones because they're massive success and popularity and they're geniuses in different ways. But I get asked all the time, Beatles, Stones, and the answer is Zeppelin. Yeah. That's the answer.
100.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
Absolutely. It's just like, if you don't start the conversation with Zeppelin, then what are we doing here? Yeah, no, I agree.
I mean, this is Jack Black when they were, whatever, they got that Kennedy's Honors Award, and Jack Black was giving a little speech, and he just says, best rock band ever. Not the Beatles, not the Stones, Zeppelin.
Why? What sets them apart?
Well, they're just across the board. I mean, the stars aligned. Who knows what happened? You have 4 absolutely prodigious musicians. Yeah. Jimmy Page, the riff master himself, so creative, had such a vision. I mean, he basically invented a genre of music. Everything that becomes heavy, it starts there with Jimmy Page. Robert Plant, this the hammer of the gods, this otherworldly frontman with his howls and that voice. John Paul Jones, multi-instrumentalist, can play everything, is just the perfect guy to fill every little hole that might be there. Bass parts, keyboard parts. And then so the band forms with Jimmy Page has this vision. He gets John Paul Jones, who was also a session musician, but they're looking for, a drummer and a front man, and they find this singer, Robert Plant, out in the hinterlands of England somewhere. And they think, well, he must be just a terrible person or he'd already be in a band. But no, they found him. And then Robert Plant says, I have this friend. He's a drummer. It's John Bonham, which is, I think, the greatest rock drummer in history. Some people want to go with Neil Peart, but I don't know. I think it's Bonzo. Really? So anyway, I want to hear Jay chime in on this, but you just go down that they found each other and they came together, and that's it.
Jay, you were in full agreement with that.
Yeah. So, but I would think my reasons are probably a little different. Definitely they're talented, but there are a lot of talented rock musicians out there. You don't get the number one by being the most talented. You got to tap into something. And I think with the English invasion, listen, for the quickest of quick breakdowns for people who are not familiar, how we got rock and roll. Black people were sad. They sang out to Jesus, but then they also like to party on Saturday nights before church. And the way the music went was kind of like cool, but they wouldn't put it on the radio. And then white people started like, well, we like that, but what if we put a white face on it? But then people started being like, I don't know about that either. It's starting to sound like the black music. But the British, they said, well, we don't have the baggage they got in America. Right. And so they started copying these black artists, and they actually shipped them over and got inspired by them. And so all of that Mississippi mud that got in the veins of all these people made its way to England, but no one tapped into it like straight to the vein like Led Zeppelin. They were the first ones that were full on, like they came out of the mud where I'm from. And that's whatever spiritual thing that comes from a place, they captured that place, even though they got no business knowing what that was.
That whole phenomenon of these white kids in England getting just absolutely mesmerized by Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf and whoever else, B.B. King and all that, and just Albert King and all of them. That's such a cool phenomenon. So it actually starts like this. In some of the Western African languages are tonal pitch where a flatted fifth expresses emotion. Okay, slaves end up in America and they lose their language, but they still have this memory of a flatted fifth to show emotion, and that becomes blues music. And it floats back and forth between the church and the juke joint, just as Jay just said. And you have your race records. He gave it to you perfect. And then, however, I mean, if you listen to Mick Jagger or Keith Richards or whoever talk about, they had to go find these records. They weren't readily available. They would go to record stores and hunt for them. And here's a Blind Willie Johnson album, and they would sit down. And what we call rock, heavy rock, is the blues played fast and loud. That's what it is.
And electric. There was also there was also the technology merged with the times. Yeah. Where for the first time we had electric instruments, and which was around the 40s or so. They started becoming more common.
It's when they left Mississippi and went up to Chicago, and they're playing bigger venues, and it's louder. They just needed amplification to be heard because they're not just sitting around, the plantation. And
real quick,
they figure out how to make it loud.
What years are we talking here? Like when the music started to become popular in England? Are we talking like 50s, 60s?
Early 60s.
Yeah. Early 60s.
Early 60s.
No, you guys haven't mentioned Elvis. Wasn't Elvis a bridge between the kind of blues and
Elvis
rock,
was a thief. Elvis was a thief, and he was really good. And I think
I would say that's accurate.
For being
he wasn't adding anything new to it other than being white. That was the new thing he added. What the Who and the Stones, Beatles are in a little different category, and Zeppelin are doing is they are bringing their own interpretation, their own energy to it. And this also comes from a place of, post-war Britain, which was a bleak place. And so they're tapping into that kind of angst. Yeah, so it was a lot of things came together at the same, and it happened so fast. That's the thing. There were these
festivals in the 50s where, like, black artists, like John Lee Hooker was young. They were rediscovering Delta artists from like the 30s. Like, there's the most famous is Sunhouse, who legendarily taught Robert Johnson to play guitar. Robert Johnson famously sold his soul to the devil, apparently. Yeah. But Sunhouse was a Baptist.
Crossroads, Highway 61 and 49 in Clarksdale, Mississippi.
That's right. Really? And that's right up the road from.
I've been there. I've been to the Crossroads, brother.
I've been there. I've been there 100 times. I mean, I used to just go there for the cotton. But they'd find these guys and they'd bring them to these festivals. And so they're rediscovering something that had been lost. Like Sunhouse was probably the most legendary blues story. Baptist preacher murdered someone, could never really be forgiven or forgive himself, sang sad blues songs. The Preacher Blues is one of my favorite songs of all time. Death Letter. Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's haunting. Yeah. And then that's the thing. Like, there's a spirituality. What makes the best rock band? Back to that. There's a spirituality and a hauntingness that resonates with the core of our humanity, that this style of music captured like nothing else had before or since.
Yeah.
It's entirely unique. And so the best rock band has to embody that, has to epitomize capturing that dark, sad longing, but also like this kind of like resilience that says, I'm going to sing about this instead of, you know, whatever other negative things you could do. Like, it's just like some of the things you're singing about, you know, like Sunhouse always talk about, he's like, they ain't but one kind of blues, he said, and that's between a man and a woman. And it's like, you can expand that a little bit and spiritually and see that, yeah, I mean, in a way, there's this tension between two persons who want to love each other, but are actually each other's worst enemy in practice most days. That's rock and roll. I mean, that's rock and roll. And
more than any other genre, like that's unique to the rock genre, or is that just music and
yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, I would. Pop music is more saccharine than that. Pop came out of rock. So
you have the fado music of Portugal, you know, but we don't really know that because we don't speak Portuguese, but it has a similar history. Yeah.
What years were Zeppelin? 60s to 70s, right? What specifically?
68 to 80, I guess.
That's not very long.
I got a Robert Plant story. I was hoping I'd get the horn in here. So this seems like a good spot talking about the spirituality of it. So I was with an artist I was working with, and we were down in outside of Rolling Fork, Mississippi, and we were doing some photos for his record and all this. And so we go out there, and I see a truck coming up our way, and they're like, hey man, is this your farm? And he goes, yeah. He's like, what are y'all doing? And I'm like, we're just taking some photos. You know, this guy's a musician, and, you know, we're just taking some photos out here and like the landscape and everything. He goes, yeah. I was like, is that okay? You know, he goes, oh, yeah. I'm trying to figure out if you're somebody I should know. And I'm like, oh, no. We're, you know, kind of small time independent artists. He goes, well, because this strangely, this happened before. He's like, I was out here and I see a man with long hair like a woman, and he's out there digging in my dirt. We didn't even have you know, it was a downfield at the moment. It was just dirt. And I said, Mister, what are you doing? And he says, oh, if you don't mind, I want some of your dirt for my vial. And he's like, he talked like that, you know. And he said, well, what do you mean? He goes, and he showed me, and he wanted to wear it around his neck. He's like, so he's got a vial on my, he's like, this guy, his name's Robert Plant. You know who that is? And I said, yeah, I know who Robert Plant is. He's like, well, he's wearing a vial of my dirt around his neck.
That's awesome.
He just wanted the spirit of that Mississippi.
Yeah, exactly.
Around his neck.
John Bonham died. Like he killed himself?
He drank himself. He asphyxiated after, you know, about 20 shots of vodka.
Oh gosh.
That's the thing with rock and roll. There ain't, like, how many of these people die young?
Yeah.
Live fast and die young. You know? I mean,
is that why they're only around for 12 years is not long at all. I mean, the Stones have been around for like 200 years.
Well, but the Stones are the outlier. They're the outliers.
For sure.
Oh, so 12 years isn't that.
So that's actually a pretty good run there.
Oh, okay.
U2 and the Stones are really more outliers in being able to, and that's the other dynamic.
Huh.
I mean, one of the dynamics of what makes a great rock band is that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And I think U2, you got a U2 shirt on, so I'll talk about U2 for a second. If you just, because I started off with Zeppelin, and I talk about, you know, they're all virtuosos, and that's true, they are. Now they're more than that, but they are. U2 are not virtuosos. You know, Edge is very creative and no one quite sounds like him. He's got his thing going there. I get that. But they're not necessarily the greatest musicians. And yet, I mean, the reason they started writing songs is they weren't good enough to do covers. They couldn't play somebody else's songs or what? To write our own songs. And about when U2 made their first tour of the U.S., which I think was '82. I think that was the year. I had a friend. I've always been around musicians all my life. He's a drummer. To this day, he's a professional drummer. And he said, BZ, last night I was at the Uptown. I saw this new band from Ireland called U2. He said, they're not necessarily each individual, but they're not that great. But when they're on stage, when they do something, they got something. He said, you better pay attention to this new band from Ireland called U2 because
what year is this?
Something.
Is this like late 70s or early?
This would have been 82. Yeah.
82. Oh, wow. Is it too simple to say they're just really, really good performers?
No, I think that's too simple. I mean, there's a lot of performers. There's a chemistry. I know it sounds cliche, but there's a chemistry. There's a magic. There's something that happens so that it's actually a band. Okay. Super groups are fun. You'll hear of them now and then. And it's kind of, they do one-off album. And it's okay. That's great. Probably the best ever would be the Traveling Wilburys, and all that. But no, there has to be this chemistry, and super groups are a cheat because they're already famous and they've paid their dues. There's something about, being 19 and in a van together.
I was about to say, it's about riding in that van. Yeah.
Yeah. Us against the world. Yeah. That's
so hard to describe chemistry that they have. It's hard to even taint. It's just
and they have to, that's why the great ones become great, is because the chemistry does work. And sometimes there has to be adjustments early on. Some of the band members aren't going to be there more than 6 months. Yeah. And they got to find out who works. But then when it hits,
there's the pastor friend of mine, Josh Stump. Josh, owns a cigar lounge now, but he used to counsel bands all the time. That was kind of his thing. He'd counsel bands, and here in Nashville, so there's a lot of bands to be counseled. And he'd say the same line. I'd heard him say this line 100 times, but he would try to reframe how bands would think about what they were. He's like, a band is like a bad marriage without the sex. Because you're crammed in these close quarters.
Right, exactly.
Every minute of every day with one another. Even if you break out and say, well, I'm going to go eat over here. Can I take a per diem or whatever? But you're back in that van. And then you're driving for hours on end, and then you're standing up there, and you also have the shared experience of 10 or 15 people who paid to see you. And you're just like, we're putting so much into this. We didn't make jack, and that can't be replicated after you hired a pro, once you made it. It just, that can't be, you can't get that back. And that's why, Jack White right now is on tour in a van. Yeah. And he's like, you don't know where the show is till the day of the show. And I talked to someone actually who knows his manager real well. And he said, he's losing his mind. He's like, because it's so much more for him, because he has to call, everything has to be done within hours of the show. He's like, but Jack's just like, I'm having the best time of my life. And it's, I don't know Jack.
Well, he's just riffing on what Dylan did back in 1975 with the Rolling Thunder Review, where Dylan just said he wanted to recapture that kind of spontaneous energy, and he put together this kind of rock and roll review, this kind of rock show. He's got a band, but he's got other performers, and they're traveling in a school bus, for crying out loud, throughout New England. Dylan is driving the school bus. This is for real. You can see the documentaries on this and the actual clips. And they would usually announce a few hours before. They'd roll into town, and they're going to do a show at Memorial Hall in some town in New England. And it was because I think Dylan wanted that. He wanted to feel that again, that kind of that energy where it's not over managed and it's just flying by the seat of your pants. And it's kind of like the circus comes to town sort of situation.
So as far as chemistry goes, I mean, Dylan's band, The Band, is one of the best bands of all time too. If you really, we could talk about them on the list because
we should. And the thing about the band is they're not necessarily known by the masses, but they're known by the artists.
Right.
I mean, Clapton said they changed my life, and Clapton wanted to be in the band. You know, well, no,
really,
you're not going to be in the band.
Wait, Bob Dylan's band was called The Band.
So what happened was,
you know who the band is. You know their songs. Everyone I say this to is like, oh yeah, and I know that song.
The Weight is their most famous one. But so Dylan goes electric. He's looking for a band. He finds this bar band with Ronnie Hawkins, and it was like Ronnie Hawkins and the Hawks. And to make the long story short, more or less Dylan steals this band because he recognizes they have potential. They have a lot of, they're a bar band. And Dylan more or less steals them, makes them his band, and they they travel the world as he goes electric, and they're his band. And then Dylan in 66 has his motorcycle wreck, and he's kind of he's not touring anymore, but he wants to keep the band around. So the band isn't called anything other than they're just the band because they're his band. And so he sets them up in Woodstock. The reason Woodstock is because Dylan lived in Woodstock. Oh. And when the big festival was going to happen, which wasn't actually in Woodstock, the promoters did it there because the one artist they wanted was Dylan, and Dylan didn't show up. Just because that's what he is. So
he didn't show up to Woodstock.
No, he's I don't know. And so to keep things going, Dylan and the other members of the band were writing songs that the idea was they're going to be demos, and we would, give them to other artists to record. And they're staying in this house called Big Pink there in upstate New York. But eventually the band decides they're also going to be their own entity, and they're going to, they have enough of their own songs. They're going to tour on their own and be in a band. And they just couldn't come up with it. What are we? Well, we're the band. And so that's their name, the band. One of the most influential. I mean, the whole thing of like country rock really comes from the band. They're considered like the most American of bands, although only one of the five was an American. They're all Canadians. It's a great story. There's all kinds of documentaries on it. You should.
And I'll just, as an Arkansas native, I'll just say that they wouldn't have been anything without that one.
Levon Helm, the drummer singer, and nobody's going to argue with that. Nobody's arguing with that. His influence was so great that it makes them an American band, even though they're 80% Canadian.
Right, and all their best songs are the ones that he sang.
Yeah. But Robbie Robertson was the best songwriter. He's the one that wrote The Weight and all those.
I'll never like him.
Because you're from Arkansas.
I know.
you're getting into that feud that they had there.
No. He's a scoundrel to me. So that's right.
I like Robbie.
Real quick, so going back quickly to you two, I've always wondered why are their songs, especially like from Joshua Tree, why did they never get old? You could walk around a store and you'll hear a U2 song, and it just feels like this feels just as fresh, just as energizing as it was 40 years ago, where you can have a hit song today, a pop song or something, and after listening to it for 30 times, it's just, and I'm going to sound like the old man, or we're all kind of old men, but I mean, it's just like, it just gets annoying after a while, and it doesn't have any longevity, it seems like hit songs.
Well,
today,
that's pop. Pop is pop. I mean, I know it's popular, but it's also, it's easy to like real quick and easy to not like after about 10 times.
Oh, so pop genre that's kind of
that's my opinion. I think great artistry demands something of you that it demands you come to me. You come to me. I'm not going to pander for and then I don't know. Joshua Tree's during COVID because we were just all sitting around our basements doing something. And I did several, I don't even do podcasts, but I did some then. I did one on 10 near perfect albums. And one of them was Joshua Tree.
Yeah.
And it's ever so often, like Dark Side of the Moon would be one. Okay. I think George Harrison's All Things Must Pass would be one. Certainly Bob Dylan's Blood on the Tracks. These are like near perfect albums where there's not
Exile on Main Street.
Yeah. Oh, I love Exile on Main Street.
It's a great album, right?
Yeah, and go ahead, but that's an album that the critics didn't like to begin with. Because it didn't have those poppy hit kind of songs. They're just in that basement in France and and it's just they're about half drunk, and you can tell, but it's great. And that's a great Axel on Main Street. I think that's the Stones' best album. I really do.
I agree. No, for sure.
Wow. Okay. So 70s Zeppelin. What are some bands that they kind of give birth to that become some of the top bands, say in the 80s? And I want to also ask, like, where does the glamour rock era fit in? Queen's the
Motley Cru. You're thinking more hair metal.
Hair bands. Hair bands.
Yeah. You can blame Zeppelin for that for sure. But in the same way, like a more modern way that happens is Pearl Jam gave us Creed, gave us Nickelback. You know, it's like a watering.
But Nirvana did the work of the Lord in killing off the hair bands.
They did.
Nirvana did. Okay.
I think going back though, listening to some Motley Crue, I'm like, they're a pretty good band.
Yeah.
You know, but there was definitely a time.
Well, Motley Crue for me is a band that's better to listen to and not see their music video.
Right. Sure. But yeah, so Zeppelin gave us metal, period.
Every heavy band that's existed in the last 50 years knows they owe a debt to Zeppelin. That's why I said early on, Jimmy Page basically invented a genre.
Yeah,
I mean, it all comes from
them and Sabbath.
I was going to took the words out of my mouth. I was about to say that, and Sabbath.
Yeah, Black Sabbath.
Jimi Hendrix, is he just kind of adjacent to those? I mean, or is he doing his own thing?
It's hard to say because he left the scene so quick. He could definitely be heavy, but it wasn't. It was different. It was so established in the blues. Okay. Of course, Zeppelin's in the blues, but they don't just stay there. I mean, like Immigrant Song, you go, okay, I can see the blues influence, but it's not blues. Okay. So I can't imagine Hendrix doing a song like Immigrant Song or Kashmir. I just can't imagine Hendrix doing that. He's a guitar virtuoso in the blues world, the best there ever was at that. But he's going to stay there. Okay. He may not have, but he did because he died at 27.
Oh, he did that young. Okay, well, that's wow.
No, I mean, he didn't make it out of the 70s, did he? He died in 69, I think.
Yeah, the 27 Club. He's one of him and Robert Johnson and Kurt Cobain.
Brian Jones.
Yeah, I mean, it's a
27 Club. Is that rock and roll?
Yeah, that's a term. That's people that died at 27. Janis Joplin, Kurt Cobain.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Robert Johnson was the first. You know who Robert Johnson is, Preston?
No.
Robert Johnson gives us the archetype for the rock and roll man.
Right.
Because he rejected the music of the church. And he legendarily sold his soul to the devil. I've heard about that. We mentioned earlier. But he is still considered the greatest guitar player of all time by many of the greatest guitar players of all time.
Really?
Yeah.
They still can't figure out.
Clapton calls him his true north. That's, his.
Yeah. Really? Wow.
Clapton's got a clip somewhere I saw where he said, I still can't figure out what he's doing on these parts. And he's like, I studied.
Clapton did 2 cover albums of Robert Johnson's material. Can't remember the names of them, but he talked about how hard he had to practice. And if you hear these recordings, these, Robert Johnson recordings from the 30s, and, it really is. You listen to it and you go, that's just one guitar. There's no multi-tracking. Right. It's just it. But you go, how is he doing that? Just one acoustic guitar. And so, the great legend, and it works great in rock, is that he sold his soul to the devil at the Crossroads and he got this great gift. But what happens is he was one of the guys that was playing the juke joints, and then he just disappeared for a while. And then when he came back, he was really good.
He was so good, right?
Yeah,
and that was his wilderness, but like his almost like anti-Jesus time in the wilderness where he came back, but he was
it's like Clapton will say though. He says what I really think was happening is he was what they call woodshedding. During that time, he was just practicing. But selling your soul to the devil's a better story than just I practiced a whole lot.
So the Crossroads isn't the actual location you guys have been to where
there's not one.
There was at one point it was disputed, but it is now Highway 61, Highway 49.
Right.
Highway 49 is the highway. So Helena, Arkansas has a bridge. It was one of the only bridges back in those days between Memphis and like Vicksburg. So it was heavily traveled between Mississippi and Arkansas. And Robert Johnson actually lived in Helena for a long time. But that Highway 49 runs east-west, and 61 runs basically parallel to the Mississippi River from Minnesota to New Orleans.
Yeah. I mean, that's US 51. It goes the whole length of the country, basically.
Yeah, it's so that's like the Mississippi River Highway, you know.
So Dylan has his album, 1965, Highway 61 Revisited, which that's 1966. 65. It has Like a Rolling Stone, but it also has the song Highway 61. God said to Abraham, kill me a son. Abe said, man, you must be putting me on. God said, no. Abe said, what? God said, you can do what you want, Abe, but the next time you see me coming, you better run. Abe said to God, where you want this killing done? God said, you can do it out on Highway 60.
Yeah, so it's like true rock and roll has this tension between temptation and righteousness. And like it is a thread that is run through every subgenre of rock and roll. There's this kind of like we mentioned Motley Cru. I love the song Shout at the Devil, which is like there's this tension there of I'm against you, but I'm really doing everything you want me to, and I acknowledge that. And that's a wild story of what's his name? Not Nikki Sixx. Who's the front man? I can't think of the front man of Cru right now. Anyway, he's got a thing where he said they were doing a seance one night. And he just thought it's silly, stupid stuff. He doesn't believe in any of that. But it got real. There was a dark presence in the room, and he flipped. And he said, "That I'm out. I'm not doing this." And that's where Shout at the Devil came from.
Oh, really?
It was a response to a seance that got too real. So it's the devil in rock and roll is like, but let me come back the other side. And one thing we haven't mentioned, and I'll put it under the rock and roll heading, is the black music moved from blues to soul. It never lost its blues influence. And in that time period where we had the British invasion, the black artists were giving us Motown, and they were giving us Stax Records. Cadillac Records was a little earlier than that. But Stax is I know a lot about Stax Records. And so these are giving us soul music.
Right.
And one of the people that came out of Stax Records, Mavis Staples, who's still alive, and allegedly her and Bob Dylan were betrothed and never got married. But Mavis, I saw Mavis play in Helena.
Bob proposed to her and she turned him down.
That's what it was. Yep. And anyway, I saw Mavis play in Helena at this Gospel Roots Festival. And she had just got inducted to the Hall of Fame, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And she said, people say, Mavis, why do you want to be in that Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? Don't you know that's the devil's music? And she said, I tell them all the same. The devil ain't got no music. And I have internalized that. That happened probably 15 years ago. I have internalized that.
Yeah.
People say, the whole debate we used to have in the 90s about secular versus Christian music. And I'm like, there's no such thing. I'm now like, there's no such thing. The devil ain't got no music. That's it's not secular and sacred music. It's good and bad music.
Right. That's the categories I pay attention to. I've seen Dylan a gazillion times. Maybe, I don't know, 15 years ago, maybe 10 years ago. I can't really remember. Mavis Staples was opening for him. And so I saw Mavis Staples at Starlight Theater in Kansas City. And I tell you, her set, it was just pure church. That's all it was. It was just church. It was fantastic. But I mean, it was if she'd done everything exactly like she did at Starlight Theater on a Saturday night, some Baptist church on Sunday morning in downtown Kansas City, it would have fit perfectly. It was just church. Well, they got their roots. You're talking about greatest albums of all time. I'm going to probably say the Be Altitudes by the Staple Singers.
From first track to last track is just incredible. And so, like, when I think about roots of rock and roll, there's in the last 10 years been like this, a lot of rock bands have tried to capture that Memphis sound from the mid 60s and, this neo soul revival, they call it. But that to me is like, that's another path that rock and roll, one path was the Zeppelin led to metal and stayed with the devil stuff. But there's this other, that gospel was always mixed in, and the Stax, there's always this gospel sense
right
to it. It's always kind of been there. And then, you see artists all the time, they'll drop a gospel song on you at a rock concert. And
even Zeppelin has to do, Jesus make up my dying bed,
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, wow.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, there's just like that. We're getting more to what I consider to be what makes rock and roll what it is. It's like, it's the devil and the Holy Spirit in the same room, and that's what you get with rock and roll comes
that's
out.
Where the distortion comes from.
That's right. Yeah.
How about the hair bands of the '80s? Are there like in terms of talent? Are there some that stand out? I mean, I like Guns N' Roses, but
Guns N' Roses. I don't know. Do you count Van Halen? I don't think Van Halen. Do they count as they're not an '80s hair band, are they?
I wouldn't call them that, but
really,
they also led to it. They had the hair. Eddie had the hair.
Yeah. I guess you would. Yeah, I mean Eddie Van Halen.
What constitutes a hair band? Like
for another generation? He's another generation's whoever. Hendrix, Page, Clapton, Jeff Beck. Actually, Jeff Beck is the guitar hero's guitar hero.
Yeah,
I've been around enough great musicians, great guitar players. I ask them, tell me your 3 or 4 favorite guitar players. Jeff Beck's on everybody's list.
Really?
And I've seen him. I saw him a few times. His death, man, that hit me hard. Jeff Beck. Preston, do you even know who Jeff Beck is?
I know him. I'm sure I've heard some of his music. Just know he's an amazing guitarist.
He was a guitar virtuoso from the '60s on. He just died a couple of years ago.
Oh wow.
Who was as good at the time? He got meningitis and just died really quick.
Wow.
Man, that guy was good. But he was so you have these 3 great guitar players that kind of grow up together. In fact, Page and Jeff Beck actually knew each other as teenagers. And so you have Clapton, Page, and Jeff Beck. None of them are really singers. Eventually, Clapton teaches himself to sing so he's not beholden to a band. Page goes out and finds himself a singer. That's Robert Plant. And Jeff Beck taught his guitar to sing. Come on, people out there. If you don't know who Jeff Beck is, just get on your Spotify and start listening to some Jeff Beck.
Is Hendrix up there in the top guitarist?
Yeah, I was talking about these 3 British guys that grew up together, and then Hendrix comes over because Hendrix was not known in the U.S., but he shows up in London and then just blows everybody's minds.
Oh, really?
I mean, everybody's just like, well, I guess we're going to have to get new jobs now. Who wants to hear us play guitar anymore?
Yeah, so you can kind of tell like what generation people are with by who they say the guitar players are.
Right.
Like, so Eddie is Gen X's.
Eddie's legit, man. I mean, that guy's a freaky guitar player.
And he's probably, in fact, a lot of the musicians I know around here, they talk about him in demigod status.
Right.
So they weren't necessarily influenced by the 60s, 70s rock bands as much. But the 80s stuff, and there's been kind of a throwback to that. I mean, in a lot of this stuff, we're seeing stuff we used to mock come back and be taken seriously now in rock and roll. Like we mocked hair metal. Well, people are actually going back and treating it seriously. Right. And
but part of the genre itself was
butt rock is amazing now. Butt rock is Creed,
right?
But they're filling arenas, and not because people are that cynical. They just want to pay a ticket to mock someone. It's like, actually, we like this, which count me in. I did the whole cycle. I loved Creed. I was like, oh, what was I thinking? And now I'm like, no, it holds up. It's okay. It's pretty good.
So to stick with guitar players here for a minute, and maybe John Mayer. I think John Mayer is an example of someone whose people don't realize how great a guitar player he is.
No, agreed.
Yeah, I never would have thought.
Until the John Mayer trio, I had no idea. He was just this saccharine pop kind of guy, but he dumbed his talent down to get famous.
Right. And, he did.
I think you're exactly right. Dumbed his talent down to get famous.
Yeah, he definitely did. And
to play some pop-oriented music.
Okay.
Pop-oriented music doesn't need these shredding guitar solos, but
right.
I just got tickets to see Dead and Company at the Sphere in Las Vegas, and whenever it is, I'm going to see them. I think May or something. But
you a Deadhead?
No, I can't claim that status.
Okay,
but I appreciate the Grateful Dead. I really do. I listen to a lot of Grateful Dead, and it's an acquired taste. You have to learn how to get to it. But that's what happened in John Mayer. John Mayer was like, he just vaguely knew. I mean, he knew who they were. He's in the industry, but he's not paying much attention. And then he fell down the rabbit hole. And that's how it is with the Dead, because there's so much there. And it's easy to dismiss. You hear one song, one live track from 1972, and you go, oh, they're just all over the place. Yeah. But you stick with them, you go, wait a minute, there's something going on here. And Mayer becomes obsessed with them. And then he talks himself into being able to set in with kind of the remaining members of the Grateful Dead. And one thing leads to another, and now you have this Dead and Company, which is sort of like, if you listen to what Mayer's doing on guitar, he actually is still being respectful of Jerry Garcia, but it's kind of like elevated cooking. You're taking, the basic recipe that you got from grandma, but now, with your French training, you're elevating it. And that's kind of what John Mayer is doing with playing with Dead and Company.
Yeah, I'm a massive fan of the John Mayer trio, and
they're awesome. Yeah.
But they probably got the best session drummer and the best session bass player going in those days, and they just did a 3-piece. And let me tell you something, 3-piece is the core, and there's something
no place to hide.
I want to over spiritualize this, with the unity of 3, but there is something like when you pull that off, it's like nothing else. You bringing in all the other musicians. No, if you can do it with just those 3, it's the best. The power trio is, like, to me, the pinnacle of rock and roll. And not many can do it because you can't do it. You can't fill the sound with it. You don't,
So here's my one contribution to this conversation is the best power trio, of course, is Rush, right?
Oh yeah, Rush. Okay, well let me finish up and then we'll go to Rush. But
okay.
But, so Perry and I a few years ago went to see Robert Plant in KC because I was too young to ever see Zeppelin live. I mean, it just was.
Plant was still playing?
Oh yeah. For sure.
Still is, yeah.
And Perry, we went to the show, we enjoyed it, we're leaving. Perry says, "What do you think Jimmy Page would think of this?" I said, "I think he would think, it takes 3 guitar players to replace me, doesn't it?" I mean, they're doing some Zeppelin songs, but there's 3 guitar players up there, not 1.
Yeah, absolutely. That's and the power trio, like having a front man. I mean, Zeppelin sort of qualifies because a power trio can have 4 members if one of them is just singing. It's just singing, right? Exactly. So like, there's something really special, almost like if you want to hallow this stuff and like sanctify it, like there's something almost sacred about the power trio that nothing else can do.
Cream,
Cream, absolutely, yeah. Ginger Baker, you seen that documentary?
Yes,
the Ginger Baker.
I've seen all the documentaries.
It's one of the wildest things I've ever seen. I've seen all the documentaries too, but
Ginger Baker's scary, isn't he?
He's something else. I mean, it's wild, man. He's something else.
Who's he the lead?
Ginger Baker and Jack Bruce and Eric Clapton. If you don't, that's Cream.
Yeah, he was Eric Clapton's drummer or Cream's drummer. Man, he's. Whew.
Oh, Clapton was part of Cream. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Clapton's been in like everything. I mean, he's been all these kind of different,
So it's very hard to give your body all the nutrients that it needs, even if you're a healthy eater. I mean, I typically eat pretty healthy, except for Pizza Fridays and Taco Tuesdays. But even if you're a healthy eater, kind of like me, you should still add a nutritional supplement to your routine. I've tried lots of different supplements over the years, and my absolute favorite is AG1. AG1 is a high-quality supplement that supports my energy, digestive regularity, it supports my immune system, and even my healthy mood. I drink AG1 every single day. Sometimes I take it I drink AG1 every single day. Sometimes I drink it twice a day when I'm traveling or feeling like particularly run down, and I can feel the difference. It's like a nutrition blast to the body. I know a lot of us are probably making resolutions to be healthier in 2025, so I would highly, highly recommend trying AG1 for yourself. And it's perfect time to start a new healthy habit. That's why I've been partnering with AG1 for so long. And AG1 right now is offering new subscribers a free $76 gift when you sign up. You'll get a welcome kit, a bottle of vitamin D3 K2, I take that every day as well, and 5 free travel packs in your first box. So just be sure to check it out. drinkag1.com/TITR to get this offer. That's drinkag1.com/TITR to start your new year off on a healthier note. Hey friends, if Theology in the Raw has blessed or challenged you in any way, would you consider supporting the show through Patreon at patreon.com/Theology in the Raw? We are actually revamping our bonus material that Patreon supporters get. So we are going to 2 bonus Q&As per month for all the different paid levels. Silver level gets access to ask questions for the Q&A episode. And also, you will get access to Exiles in Babylon archived content, which will be releasing different videos every month. Also, access to bonus research episodes that I'm gonna record from time to time. Access to rough drafts of certain things I'm working on, which is a little scary for me to let people look into that because it's a rough draft. Gold and Gold Plus members get we have monthly Zoom chats and all the other perks that the other tiers get access to as well. So again, if you want to support the show, it really, really does help us to flourish as a ministry. Again, patreon.com/Theology in the Raw. I will see you in the community. So I'm going to argue that Rush is. I don't know enough to say.
Oh no, they're in the conversation for great power trios for sure.
Here's going back to your point, Brian, about the artist. A true artist is going to you come to them; they don't come to you. Yeah. So you had Rush. They break on the scenes in the early mid 70s with Working Man. It took off, got them on the map, and then I think they released a couple more albums that were decent. And then they started to do all this creative stuff. They released Caress of Steel, I think in 75. They had one 10-minute song called The Necromancer, and then they ended the album on a 20-minute song. The Fountain.
Well, this is the heyday of what we call prog rock and stuff like that.
Yeah. So, and that album tanks. People didn't like it. You can't play 20-minute songs on the radio. So what do? They turn around the next year. They opened their album 2112 with a 20-minute song in 4 parts about
that's it.
Some
you got to be true to yourself.
And that took off. That was did fantastic. But I mean, I love the fact that Rush said this is what we want to do. If people like it, then great. If not, it is what it is.
You all there?
Yeah, I love the spirit of, and I don't even, they have the kind of I think Moving Pictures was kind of their apex. And after that, they went more synth and everything. I didn't really like that, but I still appreciated that they're willing to just go where they wanted to go.
So you like Rush. Are you familiar with Primus?
Yeah.
I've seen Primus. I've seen Primus open for Queens of the Stone Age. I'm like,
really
huge Queens of the Stone Age. I mean, like that's, I love the Queens of the Stone.
What was the bassist like watching? I don't know his name. The Primus.
I was front row, man. It was all. I was literally front row.
He does things with the bass nobody else can do. It seems like.
Yeah. No, he's funny and he's a good performer. And there were people sitting on the front row and he was yelling at him and I was all for it. And
Primus. Oh wow!
Go to a Primus show and sit there.
Yeah. My biggest regret in life is I've never actually seen Rush in concert, and now Neil died in 2020. You don't think Neil Peart was the best drummer? I mean,
he was the best technically, but I don't Bonzo,
like being able to do
back in the groove and.
Okay.
I don't know. There's just something about
that's always been my. I mean, like Buddy Rich never played in a rock band. Buddy Rich probably the most talented drummer ever.
Right.
But he didn't get what made rock and roll. I mean, Yeah, the Motown drummer.
Buddy Rich wouldn't understand really how to play When the Levee Breaks.
Right. Right. Exactly.
He would play it correctly instead of the way
right.
The way Bonzo played it.
It made where your soul is exploding every time that hit that tom. Yeah.
Wait, that's got that heavy kick drum, right?
So, so you're there in Nashville, Jay. That's where the Black Keys are these days.
Oh yeah, actually, right next door to my neighbor's house is this old Victorian. They did a music video in that house. The Black Keys did.
So I've been to a bunch of Black Keys shows too. I was at one I don't know, fairly recently. And again, you know, I was right up there in the front row because at this point, that's how I spend my money. But I'd not seen him before, but man, I'd forgotten how close, especially when they're just playing with two people, when it's just the two of them. You know, they have band now, but when it's just Pat Carney and Dan Auerbach, man, it's just right on the verge of a train wreck.
Right,
the whole time.
Yeah,
I mean, there's like, are they going to come together? And then they do. And
they land it. That's exactly.
It's an adventure. It's an adventure to watch them live.
I'm a big fan.
That you don't necessarily get on the recordings, but live you see, oh man, it could just about fall apart right here.
Yeah, I've seen their whole arc because I saw them when they got really big, really fast, and they didn't.
I was with them, you know, when they were playing little clubs, and so that's one of the bands that I say, well, I knew them way back when.
Yeah, wow. No, I saw them play smaller clubs, but when they went to the big stage, they kind of lost something.
Yeah,
and they didn't know how to be a big stage band, which is tough. It's a two-piece, you know. But then they figured it out. They have figured it out, and I think they've kind of settled into what they are. But you know, I have a love-hate with them too because you know they stole Junior
Kimbrough.
Junior Kimbrough. Yeah, they
give him props. They give him props.
They didn't give him no money though.
I think he's dead, but okay.
Yeah, but his estate or whatever, you know, it's just like whatever. I mean, it's just kind of like it's one of those like, oh yeah, they did a whole album just covering his songs, so it wasn't like they were even trying to hide the fact that we stole Junior Kimbrough's whole hill country blues thing,
right?
You know, but yeah. So
did you like that album Delta Cream when they're just doing that?
Yeah. No, I loved it. Yes. I mean, you have to understand that. So I grew up like I could smell the Mississippi River. And so like my whole music arc was you kind of reject what you're familiar with. And when you're a kid, when you're a teenager, you're just like, so I was like anti-blues, anti-country, you know, I wanted like just loud, screamy punk rock and roll.
I got a Ramones t-shirt on, so we need
there you go. Yeah.
At some point.
But then like it was Kurt Cobain doing that live acoustic.
No, I remember
and
that.
I'm like, who
MTV Unplugged, yeah.
And I was like, who is Lead Belly? And so then I do a deep dive, and I'm realizing.
Where did you sleep tonight?
Lead Belly was not far from where I'm from, and then that was the portal for me into all the old blues guys. And I'm like, there was a familiarity that drew me in at that point in my life that I had up to that point rejected because it was too familiar, it was too close, you know. And my whole music life changed. I was in Cape Town, South Africa, back when you used to go to record stores and you'd listen, you know, they'd let you sample the CDs. And I listened to B.B. King and Eric Clapton's record, Riding with the King.
Riding with the King. Yeah.
And I was across the world and I felt like I was back home where I grew up. And it just struck a note inside me. And I was like, I still hear it. It still rings out. And I'm like, this is it. What have I been doing? What have I been chasing? And then you realize that the people that you like actually attribute everything to those guys too. Like there's a line in that movie Crazy Heart with Jeff Bridges, which is a music
movie.
And he got his line. He said, "We all owe everything to them Delta boys."
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, you've got to pay homage. You've got to pay homage.
No, I mean, the whole world of rock, pop, soul, it all comes from like 2 counties in Mississippi. That's where it begins. That's the cradle. It's crazy.
I didn't know that.
I mean, if you start going through these names, they all grow up within about 20 miles of each other.
Wow.
Albert King, B.B. King, Sunhouse, Robert Johnson, Howlin' Wolf, all of these. Yeah.
Wow.
It all comes from this tiny little area in North Mississippi.
It is going back to Nirvana. Is Nirvana to 90s rock what Zeppelin was to 70s and 80s? I mean, was that like a transitionary kind of?
Yeah, they were that influential, that big, that sudden. Man, Nevermind, what an album.
Yeah.
Well, just what a great, that's a power trio. What a great band. I mean, they toured, Pat Smear joined them, but I mean, yeah, they changed everything almost like that. Really? Almost.
What's the relationship with Pearl Jam? Because weren't they around the same era doing similar stuff?
Well, okay, that's like.
Or is Pearl Jam a byproduct?
And then you have the debate, Nirvana, Pearl Jam.
Okay.
But then you also throw in Soundgarden.
And I was going to say the answer is Soundgarden.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say.
Really?
Jay and I are pretty much on the same thing here.
You told me that a while back, Jay. I think I even tweeted something about
the answer
is
Soundgarden. Said Nirvana or Pearl Jam, and I said Soundgarden.
I didn't even realize Soundgarden was that old. For some reason, I thought they were like 90s, not 80s. But
I like Screaming Trees, too, because that's in that flows into that Queens of the Stone Age neighborhood that I'm so into. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I love the Queens of the Stone Age too. I mean, some of the more like 21st century rock bands, which it's a short list, sadly. But everything goes through ebbs and flows. Rock and roll will never die. If anybody takes anything from this, know that rock and roll.
Well, that was my next. Okay.
Yeah.
And where is it? Where is it?
It's just it's taking a nap maybe, but it ain't. Rock and roll will never die.
There's some 14-year-old boys in their basement plugging in a Les Paul or a Stratocaster, and that's it's when they get back to playing their instruments. And you know what the gateway is? It's Zeppelin. It actually is. You'll have 13-year-olds hear Zeppelin and go, "Ooh, what is that?"
You like Greta Van Fleet?
I like Zeppelin.
Right, exactly. Right.
So wait,
they're like a young version, and like they seem to have just embraced it. Like,
I mean, I have nothing but blessings for them. God bless them. Yeah. But it reminds me so much of Zeppelin that it's a little confusing.
A little too on the nose, right? Yeah, I agree. But I mean, they're doing well, and I'm happy. But I have not listened to an entire album of theirs from front to back.
Anybody here familiar with King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard?
Heard the name for some reason.
They're a band out of Melbourne. They're now, they're like 30, 31, 32. So they've been around a while. But in like 10 years, they put out 25 albums. They're all over with genre. They do metal as well as anybody, thrash metal. But they can do everything. And they have built a real fan base. So I saw them at Red Rocks. And they sold out Red Rocks 3 shows. One evening, matinee evening. They sold all 3 out and didn't repeat a song. Because most of the people, I don't know what's most, I would say a large percentage of the people that had tickets to see King Gizzard at Red Rocks bought all 3 shows. Because they have this real fanatical, kind of like a Grateful Dead type fan base, but for, much younger generation. And in fact, it feels like it. It's all the tie-dye and all of that. They're kind of a psychedelic jam band that plays lots of different genres, and they're worth checking out. I think, in my mind, they're the most exciting live band out there.
Oh, really? Oh,
them and Fontaine's DC from Dublin.
So somebody, I was at a coffee shop and I had a Coldplay shirt on, and I think this is the band. They said, well, if you like Coldplay, you'll probably like this band.
Yeah, I don't know that I necessarily see the connection, but
okay.
King Gizzard's a lot more raw.
Okay.
A lot more jam. I mean, they're a jam band. They are a jam band. I mean, they'll do 20-minute songs, but they're good musicians.
So going back to what happened in the 21st century where it seems like pop has taken over everything and rock and roll doesn't even what are the top 5 rock bands today other than like ones that have been around since the 80s or whatever?
Foo Fighters, number 1 for me. Foo Fighters.
They're carrying the torch.
Okay.
I heard someone say that it came from who's the front guy for Radiohead?
Oh yeah.
Everybody's out there watching this podcast screaming the name. Tom.
I was gonna say Tom. Every time I say it, I want to say Tom Waits. I'm like, no, not Tom.
No, not Tom Waits. Tom. I'm sorry, I can't come up with
that.
I apologize to everybody out there. You know what I mean. I know what he looks like.
With the eye. Yeah,
he was having a conversation. I think it was with Bono. And he says, have you noticed that the bands that can fill arenas today are the same bands that filled arenas 25 years ago? It's like nobody has...
No.
At some point, it just cut off and said, okay, everybody that's newer than the Foo Fighters doesn't get to fill an arena anymore.
Yeah, I mean, like Smashing Pumpkins is like still like one of the biggest shows I've been to in the last 5 years. And it's like, you know, but, you know, you say that. Greta Van Fleet, they draw well. They draw well. They sold out an 8,000 seats.
I haven't been to any of their shows. Have you been to one of their shows?
I've not been to one of their shows. No.
I'd be curious who goes. I mean, what's the demographic?
Right? Sure. I bet it's old people.
I bet. I was just a couple of weeks ago. I was at a ZZ Top show, and I took my 14-year-old grandson with me. He loved it, and we had a great time. But I'm telling you, my 14-year-old grandson was 50 years younger than anybody there.
Yeah.
I was like, whoa, there's a bunch of old people.
I think you're going to get a generation that comes up. You know, you talk about that, your grandson. My now 10-year-old, we've got a family legend, which, you know, you got to build these legends for your family. But I was trying to potty train him, and we were at a ZZ Top show. And we spent half the concert in the Porta-John trying to get him to squeeze one out. And he was listening to ZZ Top, and we were in the Porta-John at the time.
So Jude, my oldest grandson, has been with me to 2 rock shows, ZZ Top and Bon Iver. So he's got
that's the spectrum, right? Yeah.
The spectrum, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, and you get these kind of reunion shows, like they just did one a few nights ago, actually. Billy Gibbons was there. Elvis Costello was there. What's the harmonica player for Willie Nelson? Mickey something. I can't think of his name, but he was there. And then Chris Stapleton came out, and you know, it was a whole. And listen, you got to understand, these things happen all the time in Nashville. I'm overwhelmed by the amount of just like legendary shows that just randomly happen here. Like Jack White played a last minute thing at the American Legion over here. It's like, you know, with 200 people. Just a few months ago. Jack White, we haven't said enough about
I love Jack White.
Jack White holding it down, 21st century, who's still at the top of the game. Anything he does. Dead Weather, Raconteurs.
You know, I probably like Dead Weather of all of those iterations.
Yeah.
Probably the best. I love Dead Weather with Alison Mosshart when she sings. Whew,
yeah, I saw the Raconteurs at the Ryman, and I've seen in several shows at the Ryman here, but I think that's probably the best show I've seen at the Ryman ever. The Raconteurs are so good. And that's not even that's his side project, you know, it's Jack White's side project. It's not even his main thing. So, I mean, Jack White,
he's the king of side projects.
He's
got so many different things that are Jack White. Yeah.
Oh, Greta Van Fleet, they started in 2012, so they're fairly recent.
Kids, yeah. I mean, to me, they're kids.
Well, they were kids when they were like really kids. I mean, they were like teenagers almost.
When they started, I think, yeah. And they were emulating the entire 70s, like very blousey type shirt, halfway unbuttoned. I mean, they're just doing the whole thing, you know. They're just like, we're going to be exactly like Zeppelin.
So it is still happening. It just doesn't feel. And maybe it's just my generation.
Well, I mean, it's not.
It doesn't feel like the 80s, 90s
when there was compare it to, you know, Taylor Swift and Beyonce and that sort of thing. It's a drop in the bucket. But.
And why? So why is that? Why is that?
Rock and roll belongs there. I'll just say, I don't think it belongs on Beyonce level. I don't. Exactly. It shouldn't.
See, so this is what happened with punk. That, you know, rock starts as it starts, and then you reach the level where it's Zeppelin with their virtuosity and Queen and. I don't know who else you want to name. these really over the top in artistry and musicianship and showmanship, and then you get a rebellion. Yeah, say, all right, well, we're going to play 2-minute songs just as fast as we can with 3 chords, real loud and real pissed off.
Yeah.
And this is punk. Although I will argue that it has a predecessor with the Stooges, Iggy Pop and the Stooges. That sort of gives a gesture towards what becomes punk. And greatest punk bands, I want to say the Clash, but they're not just punk, are they? Because they were kind of too good to be just punk.
Well, what I think of the roots of punk is also the blues. They just sped up the blues. And
exactly.
Like, so when
That's exactly right. But it's that rebellion.
It's rebelling against mainstream. When something goes mainstream,
rock begins as counterculture and then becomes the dominant culture. And so punk says, well, okay, we're going to find a way for it to be counterculture again. And so rock doesn't flourish when it's dominant culture, and it has to find a way to be counterculture. But then when it gets good at it, then everybody loves it. That's what happens.
Yeah, it's kind of like the church that way. It flourishes best when it's not in the arenas, when it's counterculture.
I mean, this is supposed to be theology in the wrong. We're just talking music, but
I know, Jay. Let's keep church out of this.
All of us can sit here and do theology. I mean, all of us can. Yeah. And I love the Lord. I love Scripture. I love theology. But I mean, people haven't, if they're still listening, they say, okay, enough of that.
There might be a few.
You can tell that this is easy for me to talk about. And because nobody has to care, but I do. And I just grew up in this world. I mean, I remember to this day, the first time a friend of mine had me lay down between 2 Allegro stereo speakers circa 1973 and listen to a whole lot of love. It just blew my little 13-year-old mind. And I've never not loved it. I had to go through the period of time where, in the church world, it was, it's the devil's music and backward masking and on and on and on. And I just never went down that road. I also grew up in the Jesus movement. I'm about as young as you can be and really have been really in the Jesus movement. I was pretty young, and others were. So I knew I knew, Larry Norman and Keith Green and Phil Keaggy, who's still in Nashville, is still a good friend of mine. Phil has played my guitar in one of his shows.
No, that's all.
How about that? Wow. Anyway, so I grew up in that world, and I was like 15, 16 years old and booking these artists and doing shows. So I have that too, but I never just completely let go of just good old rock and roll. And I never saw it as of the devil. It's another genre of art, and it has its play. And why should Christians care about art? Because we care about all that it means to be human. And not everybody has to care about it. Not every Christian has to care about it, for sure, but some of us do. And I think it just testifies to the fact that we're human. I'm not just a pastor, preacher, theologian. I'm also a human being that loves rock and roll. And I could probably do, almost, not quite, do a podcast almost as passionately with some aspects of literature, because I'm into literature too. But
sure. Yeah.
But it's just part of being human. And when the church tries to be too spiritual, it ends up being just less than human, and it's off-putting.
Yeah, I 100%. That's kind of it's how I'm trying to raise my boys, and like what is the gospel if it doesn't redeem our humanity? Yeah. Like we worship a Savior who was fully human, if we're going to stay orthodox, fully human. And so something about our redemptive life has to be human. And when you deny whole swaths of the human experience because of some alleged pursuit of righteousness, it's just like, no, that's not honest. That's not true. You're no longer human. Like, the idea is to redeem humanity, not replace it. Yeah. And I think the church I grew up in, and then, I grew up in the heyday of Christian rock. Like that, the 90s was my high school and college, and so there was always this conversation. And, I just ended up kind of, and I fully like burned my cassettes and everything out of faithfulness to the Lord when I was 13 years old. And no, I will stand on this. No youth pastor coerced me. I felt it from something that was happening in my personal prayer time as a 13-year-old that I no longer could tolerate this in my home. And but some of it was pretty disgusting stuff, like some gangster rap stuff that I was super into in the early 90s. So I have no regrets of that. But over time, I had to amend what my view was of that, because I'm just like, I'm trying to interact with my friends, and I realize my music sucks and theirs is awesome. And I'm like, how do I reconcile? I know God didn't save me to listen to shitty music, you know? And so, like, how do I reconcile what the Holy Spirit's doing in my heart with how this makes me feel?
Yeah.
That's not a bad feeling. It can't be like, I cannot come to a place where I reconcile. That feels so good. That makes me feel in touch with myself and everyone I've ever known, everything I've ever known. It connects me in a way that cannot be bad. It cannot. And so anyone who like denies himself that, I mean, it's this kind of pharisaical, hyper religious thing that like totally misses why God saved us in the first place. He saved us to be fully human, and where those things no longer lead us into a darkness, but it is walking on if you can't be honest about the darkness, if you can't sing about it, if you can't talk about the struggle against it, then you're just denying, you're probably more prone to a different type of darkness. You know, you've got to live in that tension. And rock and roll, that's why rock and roll is my soul music, is because it makes me walk that line between the tug of the darkness and the longing to be more fully human. So that's
good, Jay. That's good.
Brian, you want to close us out with love to hear your kind of theological reflection on the power and beauty and necessity of
we're going to close out. Let me just I got to say a few words about Dylan, because people associate me with Dylan, and rightfully
I know
and rightfully so.
And we got that biopic out now, so hashtag that.
You know, I know Dylan as well as you can know Dylan and not actually know the man. Dylan for me occupies a whole, because you've heard me talk. Okay? We didn't get into Metallica. I could talk about Metallica. I told you I love Queens of the Stone Age. So people, but then people know that my true love in the world of music is Bob Dylan, and so that's different. You know, and that's not Zeppelin. That's not Queens of the Stone Age. That's not Metallica. That's not the Black Keys. That's not Foo Fighters. But it goes all the way back to being 15 years old. I'm all into Zeppelin and Deep Purple and ZZ Top at that time. And I wake up one morning, my clock radio goes off, and it's early one morning, the sun was shining. I was laying in bed wondering if she changed all of her hair. And I just laid there in that liminal space between awake and asleep, and these rhymes just washing over me. And that's what birthed in me my love of language. And so Dylan is in a different category. Look, give everybody all the Grammys. You give Dylan a Nobel Prize for literature, for crying out loud. As Leonard Cohen said, Bob Dylan, he's a once in 500 years kind of artist. You don't get these people every day. So people, they don't have to like Dylan. They should appreciate Dylan. And they should recognize you are living at a time where a once in a 500-year artist is still active. And so you should probably be aware.
Wow. I want to hear your thoughts. And listen, I've still got this much cigar to smoke. So I want to hear your thoughts on Dylan and Christian music and his phase. And because Saved, it's not his best, but it might be my favorite Dylan record. I know I get made fun of for that. I
have to tell the story. So I'm a massive Dylan fan, and I'm a massive Jesus freak. And it's the summer of 1979. I'm 20 years old. There's rumors out there that Dylan has become a Christian. First of all, I don't know how we had rumors before the internet. I don't even know what the mode of transport was, but somehow it did. And so Dylan is coming. I know he's coming out with a new album. The new albums are always released on Tuesday. And so it was in August of 1979. I was at Musicland it was in the mall, waiting for him to lift that thing up, the cage, and let you in. So I go in there and I go right to the D's, and I pull out this album. I look at it and I go, well, I mean, I could go get it right there, but it looks like that guy with the pickaxe. That pickaxe looks more like a cross, like he's carrying a cross. And then I turned over and Dylan's I'm standing on the ship mast, but it looks like a cross. I'm probably imagining things because I'd been praying for Dylan. I'm not taking any credit here, but I'm just saying that, sure. I mean, I'm 16, 17, 18, 19, Jesus freak, love Dylan. I said, Jesus, save Bob Dylan. And so I buy the album. I go to our coffee house called the Catacombs, put it on the turntable. First song, Gotta Serve Somebody. Second song, Precious Angel. Third song, I Believe. Third song, Slow Train. I was like, tears just running down my face. Then his next album was Saved, and that's just gospel piled on top of gospel. And then Shot of Love, which is that's actually one of his more guitar-oriented, kind of loud albums. In some ways, though, his most, because they talk about it being like a trilogy of Christian albums. Right. Slow Train, Come and Save, Shot of Love. And then you have Empire Burlesque, and he's moving away from that. But in 1989, he comes out with Oh Mercy. And that's actually a Christian album from a much more reflective, mature, not the flaming zeal of a brand new convert, but someone that's actually kind of walked it for a while and had disillusionments and failures and all that sort of stuff. What is Dylan religiously? Well, he's Jewish. His encounter with Jesus in a hotel room in Phoenix, Arizona, that led him to become Christian, actually is how he found his way back into his Judaism. And so I think if you could pin him down and say, what is he religiously? He's not going to answer your question, but if he would say, I'm Jewish. And then, do you believe in Jesus? Of course. And I think that's where he's coming from right now. That wasn't the question you asked, but that's how I
didn't realize I'm just reading his article, his wiki page. He got saved in the late 70s. Was he 79. Part of the Jesus?
Yeah, 78. Coming off of he'd been touring the Street Legal album, and this was where he had some black background singers, and they're talking to him about Jesus, and it actually, because he's gone through a divorce and he's got some issues, and at least some of them attended the Anaheim Vineyard with Ken Gullickson, and so Dylan ends up at that church, and he actually went through their kind of basic discipleship program, where you're like 5 days a week for a couple of hours in the morning, and Dylan is there. I mean, he comes every day. He didn't say anything. He just went through the course. I did hear Ken Gullickson say the one time he really spoke was that part of the course requirement was to memorize the Beatitudes, and you had to recite it for the class. So he's in there with like 20. He's in his 30s by this time. This is a bunch of teenagers and early 20s. And he says, I'll never forget, Bob Dylan reciting the Beatitudes in the Bob Dylan voice, blessed are the poor in spirit, theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they should be comforted.
I love it.
So, yeah, I could go on and on about his story and where he's been. And he was friends with Keith Green, who I was friends with, and all that sort of stuff.
He's 83 years old. He's
83 years old, still touring.
Oh my word!
Just got done. Just finished up in Europe. Finished up in London, and then he dashed over to Paris to hear Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds on their Wild God tour, and then tweeted about it, how great he thought it was. Wow. And Nick Cave didn't know that he was even there till like a week later, which means if you were at one of those shows in Paris. There's got to be somebody that halfway through a Nick Cave show in Paris realized this old guy in a hoodie next to him is Bob Dylan. Which, that must have been pretty freaky.
So he literally won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 2016. I thought you were just speaking analogy.
It's not figuratively. It's not me aspirationally speaking. No, he won the Nobel Prize for literature. When it was announced, you'd think I would have won. I'd have won the Nobel Prize. I got so many texts. Congratulations! I didn't win the Nobel Prize. Bob Dylan did. But in typical Dylan fashion, he didn't even acknowledge it for 2 weeks, and then didn't show up to the ceremony. Patti Smith went in his behalf to receive the award.
Is he an introvert? Does he not like all the limelight? Or why?
He is an introvert. Yes, that's for sure. He definitely is. Keith Richards talked about it because I don't know if you remember in 2016 they were doing these shows out in like Coachella. I can't remember that, but it was like Paul McCartney and Dylan and the Stones and Bruce Springsteen and I don't remember who else. Really big bands from that era. And it was 3 nights, 2 artists each night. And like the second night was Dylan and the Stones. And this is right after they had announced that Dylan had been awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature. And he hadn't responded publicly. And Dylan he's backstage. Keith Richards sees him. Keith says, "Man, Bob, congratulations. Wow, Nobel Prize. That's great." And Dylan, apparently, according to Keith Richards, said, "Is it? I mean, is it really? I mean, I'm a musician. Do I have the Nobel Prize for Literature?" And Keith, "Yeah, you should, But I think there was a little bit of, am I Ernest Hemingway? Am I? Because that's who you give, am I John Steinbeck? Am I,
So he had genuine humility, especially for somebody
I think he, at this point in his life, he's won everything, and he's, I don't know. Go see the biopic. I think it'll be good. I
got to run, you guys. This has been fun. I got to go take my car and get some tires.
We can go.
I hate to cut it short, although it's been over an hour. But thanks, you guys, for joining me. If anybody's listening still, hope you enjoyed this episode. This is, why not? Theology Raw. We'll try things new. We'll mix things up. Me and Jay have done podcasts that fall outside the typical Theology Raw genre, I think. So.
Yeah, I'm still waiting on our baseball podcast.
We got to do a baseball one. Maybe come spring training, we should do that. That'd be fun. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know how much audience I'll retain, but whatever.
All
right, guys.
Fine.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
This show is part of the Converge Podcast Network.